Welcome to the Philadelphia Inquirer's 9/11 Forum. On this panel, we're pleased to have Senator Bob Casey. He chairs the Foreign Relations Subcommittee for the region that includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, and Iran, among other countries. George Venizelos, he's the special agent in charge of the Philadelphia Division of the FBI, which includes eastern Pennsylvania and much of South Jersey. Thanks for joining us. We'll start with a basic question. Senator Casey, 10 years after 9/11, are we safer?
Well, John, I think we are. And by the way, thank you for this opportunity. I think we are, but we still have a lot of work to do, both domestically and internationally. Domestically, obviously, all of our lives have changed with airport screening and the nature of security itself, just in our daily lives. At the same time, we've had a lot of great coordination at all levels of government. And I don't think there's any question we're safer, but we're not as safe as we need to be. That's why some of these 9/11 Commission recommendations, which haven't been implemented or fully implemented, need to be a priority to get them implemented as soon as we can. And in addition to that, I think the nature of the worldwide security environment has changed. We're not in a world where we're concerned, as we once were with the Soviet Union, as kind of the singular enemy. Now we've got a lot of enemies and a lot of places where people can originate a terrorist attack against us. Obviously, we're concerned about Pakistan, first and foremost, places like Yemen and other places. So we can talk more about it, but I think that we still have an enormous challenge. But I think we're a different country now in light of the horrific events of that day.
Which of the 9/11 recommendations haven't been implemented concern you the most?
Well, certainly the improvements we still have to make to security at airports is one. And secondly, I think that there has to be a more concerted effort to make sure that our borders are as secure as they can be. We've had some advancements in that area, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. One of the recommendations about our intelligence services is to not just to focus on, but to have the Director of National Intelligence be the main leader of our intelligence apparatus, and that I don't think we've achieved that yet. There could be as much as anything turf battles that prevent that, but I think that's among the areas where we have to really concentrate. And finally, Congress has to do more. We have, in some ways, in some areas of our work, we don't have enough oversight. In this area, we need to be, I think, a lot more streamlined, so we're not constantly dragging up to Capitol Hill various agencies or officials when they should be out doing their job. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of hearings, and sometimes we need to be a lot more efficient about focusing our attention on the right agencies, the right priorities.
What's the FBI's take on this? Are we safer 10 years later?
I think we are safer. I agree with the Senator. We're safer, but I also agree that we need to always keep on improving. We need to never get complacent. We need to always strive to be better. And I think over 10 years, we've gotten better. We are trying to be an intel-led agency. We are. I think we succeeded in that, but we need to maintain that high level, and that we just can't get complacent. We just have to always strive to be better, even 10 years from now. We should never get complacent. You know, we make one mistake, we can have a disaster where, you know, they can make mistakes. We can't make mistakes. You know, we're in the prevent business now. We need to prevent the next attack, not investigate the next attack. You know, and that's the tough task we have ahead of us now, is to prevent the next attack, not investigate it.
How much of what the FBI does the public see in regards to terrorism? You probably have perhaps a third of the agents now do nothing but counterterrorism.
Yeah, and I think one thing they don't see is our international presence now. You know, we've grown from 44 offices overseas 10 years ago to 66 offices overseas, and we have to take the fight to where it's coming from. We can't just be sit in the country and wait for them to come here. You know, and that's something we've done. We've gotten aggressive, and our partnerships have grown to not just our national partnerships, but our international partnerships. Because in this business, it's all about partnerships. It's about working together. Not one agency could do this alone, and not one. So it's all about making sure we're all working together as one big federal government, and we're all working together as one public. You know, it's going to be a concerned citizen who sees something unusual that's going to solve a case or prevent an attack. And we also need to make sure we're taking the fight overseas. You know, we're going overseas. We're building partnerships with the law enforcement overseas and then intel agencies overseas. I mean, that's where we can't just be looking at this country alone. We got to look at the world.
Speaking of the world, Senator Casey, you just returned from Afghanistan. 10 years ago, we put troops in Afghanistan, and they're still there. Is our investment in terms of preventing future terror attacks, is that paying off?
Well, to a certain extent it is, I think, already. We have, obviously, we're paying a lot more attention to Pakistan as well, a place that I visited in addition to, on the trip, in addition to Afghanistan. And I think when you go down the list of basic goals or priorities we have for the region, but in particular in Afghanistan, the security environment is much better. I know that, for example, Trudy Rubin from the Inquirer, when she was traveling back in May, generally I'm kind of summarizing at least one story that she authored, that because of our military, the security environment's better. The Taliban are on their heels. They were, I think, very much in charge of the momentum a year or two ago, a year and a half ago. So that's better, but it is fragile. You hear the phrase fragile or reversible, and you hear those phrases all the time. I think they're both true. Certainly the reversible part of that, I think, is true. We have to make sure we don't allow it to fall back into a more insecure environment. I think the investment that we've made in terms of making sure that we're developing institutions in that country is starting to pay off, although corruption is still a huge impediment to progress. I think some of the things that we don't often talk about a lot should get a little bit of airtime. One is that 10 years ago there were almost no girls in school. Now, by one estimate, USAID's estimate, you went from less than 1 million kids in school to 7 million in 10 years, and 35% of the enrollees in school are girls. So tremendous progress in that area. Healthcare access is way up by multiple percentage points. The economic growth of the country is substantial. Now, albeit they had a very small base to start from, but the country's economy is growing. So a lot of the investments are paying off, but we still have a long way to go, and we've got a deadline we're facing from which we shouldn't move. We should keep the deadline, but make sure that we're making every effort to be successful, both in terms of security development, and then the hardest of the three, I think, has been governance or anti-corruption.
So when realistically would you expect the vast majority of American troops to start leaving?
Well, we know that within the next year we'll see a drawdown of 10,000 and then another 23,000. So roughly a third of our force will have been redeployed as of roughly about this time next year, early fall of 2012. In terms of the other 65, 66,000, if that's where the number ends up, it's hard to tell how many will be there after 2014, but the deadline is to have our troops out by 2014. I think at some point you'll probably see an agreement entered into, similar to the agreement we have in Iraq, where you'll have an enduring American presence, but obviously not to the scale that we have now. In Iraq, for example, going forward, we might have as many as 16,000 people there, both State Department, military, and otherwise. So I think you'd probably see something comparable to that, if not larger, in Afghanistan after 2014. But that would have to be arrived at by way of an agreement between our two governments.
Special Agent Venizelos, you supervised the capture of the Times Square bomber in New York City. What did the FBI learn from the threat, and what lessons do you take away from what happened?
I think one thing we learned is we could not have done anything without our partners. You know, whether in that case it was NYPD was a big partner, and also we learned we don't want to. We don't want to be investigating, and we want to be getting this person before he drives into Times Square. You know, we learned that we need to be out in front. We need to make sure we have intelligence out in front and aggressively pursue every piece of intelligence. But it's all about partnerships. It's all. I mean, this whole war on terrorism is about partnerships in this country, and we could have not done anything without the help of, you know, the other government agencies and the local police department.
That's domestically, but what did we learn about the Taliban or Al Qaeda from that?
Well, we definitely learned that Shahzad, that he did go overseas. You know, he did get some type of training overseas. Fortunately, it wasn't good training because he didn't put the bomb together right. Fortunately, you know, it could have been disaster, and so we have to always pay attention to what's going on overseas, and we have to always pay attention to who's going overseas, whether it's what they're going over there for and coming back. So I mean, it's critical. That's why intelligence is critical to this whole fight. Intelligence from overseas coming here, from here going overseas, back and forth. That's what's going to prevent attack. It's going to be intelligence.
Well, I was going to interrupt there. I was going to ask, George knows this case inside and out, but I think just the fact that that person was, that potential attack was thwarted gives, I think gives some definition to this, where are we after 9/11? I mean, one of the things that I was told, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the pieces of, I'll call it intelligence, but just probably the better word is vigilance, is that you had a vendor who noticed
Yes.
Smoke or something coming
Yes.
from. I mean, just the fact that we've all been kind of conditioned or taught to be more vigilant in and of itself can be significant. And then, as George mentioned, the great coordination between federal and state and local law enforcement. That alone, I'm not sure that same scenario would have played out the way it did pre-9/11. I'll never know for sure, but I have my doubts.
No, the citizen played a major role in keeping it from ever going off. You know, that whole observation, and it's key. The citizens have to be vigilant. You know, they have to be vigilant all the time, not just this weekend for 9/11. They have to be vigilant all the time. Something doesn't look right, call the police. You know, we'll handle it. You know, the police will handle it, and that's a perfect example. And I think some parts of the country are more attuned to that than others. You know, we have to now. Obviously, New York City, they lived it. So they're very vigilant there, and they have one of the best police forces in the world to handle it. So, and it's important that we maintain that vigilance, you know, to report things. If it doesn't seem right, report it.
In May, the death of bin Laden created a visceral reaction across the United States. 4 months later, can you assess the significance of his death? How important is it in the war on terrorism?
Well, just from where I sit on the Foreign Relations Committee, the impact, I think, was substantial. I never believed that it would dramatically change the fight that we're engaged in over time, because one thing we've seen long before he was killed is that even if you didn't have, even as we were degrading Al Qaeda's strength in a lot of places, at the same time we were seeing other groups inspired by or motivated by what Al Qaeda had done on 9/11 and thereafter. So I don't think we should overestimate it, but it was a substantial achievement. And the other thing it does, I think, in addition to kind of further degrading them and possibly giving us a chance to eliminate them as a threat over time, even though, as I said before, in Yemen and other places are still very strong. The other benefit is that it showed the world that Americans will stop at nothing to get you if you're going to attack our people. And I'm not sure a lot of people around the world, especially the bad guys, maybe they didn't quite believe that. But now I think they know that it might take 5 years, 10 years, it might take longer, we hope not, but but that we'll find you eventually. And we'll dedicate resources in the focus of our country to do that. And that is a huge, I think, psychic advantage that I think is important in this long battle.
Same question for you.
Yeah, I think symbolically it was important to get the person responsible for 9/11, who was the leader, but it also, and this is just the beginning. We cannot relax, say, okay, it's over. In fact, it may be worse down the road, because now we have to find out what other groups are responsible, what other groups are trying to attack us, whether we have a lone wolf, it gets a little more chaotic. I think it's important that he paid the price for what he did, but it's also important that we don't relax, that we stay more vigilant, even more vigilant now than ever, because now you have to worry about people being sympathetic and trying to revenge the death. So we have to worry about a lone wolf who's sitting in their house, really not part of Al-Qaeda, but mentally is on the internet and getting radicalized and wants to go out there and send a message in honor of bin Laden. So we have to watch out for that. And that's even more difficult to stop at times. So on one hand, it's comforting to know that the mastermind behind it has been taken care of, but it's also important that we don't lose sight that the threat is still there, and maybe even more.
In Sunday's Inquirer, my colleague Craig McCoy is writing about, try that again. In Sunday's Inquirer, my colleague Craig McCoy writes about some of the hidden costs of 9/11, the things we aren't doing because we're spending money in Afghanistan, building schools and fighting wars and fighting Al-Qaeda, fighting in Pakistan, fighting in Iraq, Yemen, across the country, TSA, that sort of thing. What are we not doing? What are some of those costs that you see that you have concerns about?
You mean more broadly across our budget?
Yeah, are we...
I mean, to domestic priorities.
Domestic priorities.
Well, look, obviously, we could have a long debate about if you spend X in Afghanistan, you're not spending X or Y in the United States, and that's... I'm not sure we're ever going to come to a resolution of that debate. We've been having that debate a long time. But I do think that we've got to, as a country, even as divided as we are politically, there's been a kind of a unanimity or a consensus, I think, when it comes to the battle we have against terrorists. Fortunately, we've had that consensus going forward, although we're in a very difficult, precarious position now because of our own budget constraints. It's one of the reasons why it makes all the sense in the world to draw down and to transition in Afghanistan and keep that 2014 deadline for a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which is we've made progress. But the other reason, and a very compelling reason, is fiscal, that we cannot afford to be spending between $100 billion and $120 billion. That's the basic estimate annually on the effort in Afghanistan. So these fiscal pressures are real, and they are somewhat, if not substantially, determinative about what we can do in places around the world. And I think we've got to be very thoughtful, even in the battle against terror and terrorists. We got to be thoughtful about the fiscal realities that we confront, because they're not going to go away anytime soon. We're going to be in a fiscal crisis of one kind or another for the next decade, even if we reach agreement this year on cutting and on restructuring parts of our federal government. So the dollars and the costs matter, and we've got to be honest about that.
The FBI changed its priorities after 9/11. It shifted a lot of its resources and its agents from former duties to terrorism duties. What's not getting done by the FBI? I mean, what cases are you no longer investigating? What kinds of cases?
I think we're still, it varies from division to division based on the landscape they have, or the territory they have. But I think we still have to maintain a presence in our criminal arena. Well, I think there was a lot of concern that we're not working the violent crimes as much because we're working terrorism, and that's necessarily not true. We're just trying to work smarter now. We need to prioritize our work, and that's where intelligence, that's why we need to be intelligence-driven, because we need to make sure we're working what we need to be working, that we need to be working what's going to have the biggest effect in an area. Like in Philadelphia, we're still going to work violent crimes, because it's a problem in the city. We're not going to abandon the Philadelphia Police Department, but we're going to work smarter. We're going to work the bigger cases. We're going to adjust. When maybe work in a top 10 case, we may not be working with the smaller cases anymore. So that's maybe going back to the local level. But it's also important that we maximize our criminal work to support our terrorism work too. No matter what we're working, we always have to be thinking terrorism, because you could be working a street gang type case and come across something that might be terrorist related. So we have to make sure we're thinking that way too, and we are. It's more challenged now. We don't have the manpower working some of these lower priority criminal cases like we had in the past. Maybe something like the bank robberies, the note jobs, we may be pulling back on something like that. But we're still heavily involved in maximizing through task forces. That's where task forces have to work. I think our big obstacle, domestically, we've come a long way. We're working together better than ever with all the agencies. I think internationally, we still have countries that are maybe not as committed to fighting terrorism as we are. And that's an obstacle, whether they're protecting terrorists or whether they're not giving us information that we should be getting, because information is critical at a critical time. So I think our big obstacles are international relations and educating the countries to fight this battle seriously.
In terms of a terrorist attack, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
Well, I'm not sure I know enough about. George would know much more about the type of an attack that's most worrisome. But what concerns me is just the number of sources that are out there that could be the origin of an attack. You don't have, as I said before, it isn't just from the old days when you had the Soviet Union as kind of the singular enemy, and then even since 9/11 we had our focus on Osama bin Laden. Now you have so many bad guys, in a sense, so many actors out there that could, once they become, as George mentioned before, once a person becomes radicalized and has the apparatus to be able to attack, that's of great concern. So I guess in shorthand, the main concern I have is just the number of places or the number of individuals that could attack us.
What keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
What keeps me up at night is the lone wolf, is the person we don't have on the radar, the person who's in their basement being radicalized over the internet, the person who we don't know when did they cross that point of being radicalized and being operative and just losing it. Those are the concerns that we have. The biggest concerns we have is to identify that lone wolf before they become operational. And that's a challenge.
Thanks a lot. That's all the time we have.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Appreciate
Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, George. Good to see you. Thank you.